Well, welcome back to our next session of Spiritual Awakenings International Conference 2025. My name is Dana Taylor, and I am a member of the advisory board. I'm very excited to bring you our next two panelists. They are going to be speaking on spiritual awakenings, bridging cultures. Well, our first panelist is from Israel, but today he is coming from Oxford, England, and this will be Rabbi Yoel Glick. He is a teacher of Jewish mysticism, one of the pioneers of modern Jewish meditation, and author of several spiritual books. He is the director of a highly respected online academy and in-person center in Jerusalem, Israel, and it is a place for spiritual awakening and transformation of personal meditation and the study of mysticism and contemplative prayer. Today, Rabbi Glick is sharing with us spiritual awakening in the Jewish mystical tradition. Welcome, Rabbi Glick.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be here. So thank you for that introduction, Dana. And like I said, welcome everyone to this talk. And the question really is that I want to ask in this session is, how does our consciousness expand to embrace the reality of the inner world? And how do we awaken to the truth of divine nature? So in this presentation, I'm going to explore the different facets and stages of our spiritual awakening as they're presented in the Jewish tradition, particularly the mystical tradition. From the initial experience that we have to the full realization as union with the divine. So the Bible, which is obviously a great source for these spiritual experiences and mystical visitations, provides us with so many different examples. The great biblical figures such as Abraham, Jacob, Moses, the prophet Elijah, they all provide us profound models for the spiritual life. And they teach us about the struggles and challenges that all seekers face. And they portray the inner awakening that characterizes the lives of all great souls. The fact, the wide range of divine visitations and inner experiences that we find in the Bible simply boggle the mind. We begin with the life of Abraham. Abraham, according to tradition, was the son of Terach, a merchant of idols. And the tradition tells us that Abraham spent many hours thinking about the nature of reality and the relationship between the gods and human beings. One day, Abraham had a transformative experience of the oneness behind all of existence and came to the realization that there is only one God. After this experience, God began to communicate with Abraham. He told him to leave his land, his father's house, and his birthright, and go to the land of Canaan, the modern-day Israel. So Abraham left everything he knew and followed the Lord's command. He then spent the rest of his life proclaiming the truth of the oneness of all existence and the one God who watched over all and directed everything that happened in this universe. Abraham taught the path of oneness to everyone that he met. Over his lifetime, he gathered many people to his way. Today, he's celebrated as the father of three faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We now turn to the patriarch Jacob. After stealing the blessing of the firstborn from his twin brother Esau, Jacob flees from their home in fear of his brother's revenge. Setting off into the unknown, he arrives at a secluded spot in the wilderness, where in his great need, he turns to God in prayer. Then he lies down to sleep and has a dream. In his dream, Jacob sees a vision of a ladder stretching from earth to the heaven, angels ascending and descending its rungs, the Eternal One looking down from above. He wakes in the morning and declares, God is in this place, and I did not know it. This is the house of God and the gateway to heaven. His spiritual journey has begun. 21 years later, he's on his way home when he's told that his brother Esau is coming to meet him with 400 armed men. Afraid for his life and that of his family, he splits his wives, children, and servants into two camps, thinking that if one is killed, the other will survive. Then, as he crossing an empty valley alone in the middle of the night, he meets a man, an angel, who wrestles with him throughout the night. As the dawn rises, the angel blesses Jacob and gives him a new name, Israel, one who's wrestled with God and human beings and prevailed. We now move on to the life of the great prophet Moses. While Moses is in shepherding the flock of his father-in-law's Jethro, he notices a strange sight on the mountainside, a burning bush that is not consumed. Moses climbs the mountain to investigate this odd phenomenon. As he comes close to the burning bush, a divine voice commands him, take the shoes off your feet. The place on which you are standing is holy ground. Moses removes his sandals, and the great being reveals to him the divine name, I am that I am, and bestows on Moses the sacred mission of redeeming Israel from Egypt. After the extraordinary events of the Exodus from Egypt, Moses guides the people to the holy mountain, Mount Sinai, where Moses ascends the mountain to meet with the timeless, boundless one. He spends 40 days and nights without food or drink and receives the 2 tablets of the law with the 10 commandments from the hands of the Almighty. And he returns to the people, his face is shining with radiant divine light. The latter books of the Jewish Bible are also filled with incredible spiritual experiences. The Book of Kings describes the prophet Elijah's great awakening on Mount Horeb, another name for Mount Sinai. After he learns that Jezebel, the queen of Israel, seeking to kill him, Elijah flees into the Negev desert in the south of Israel. And during this flight, Elijah is fed by an angel. This heavenly meal sustains him for 40 days and nights until he arrives at Mount Sinai. Elijah then enters an empty cave on the mountainside and plunges deep into meditation. Incredible events that take place there in the cave can be understood in terms of the different stages of inner awakening that precede spiritual union. The prophet Isaiah proclaims, there shall be a visitation from the Lord of hosts with thunder, and with earthquake, and great noise, with whirlwind and tempest, and the flame of a devouring fire. These 4 forces represent the 4 stages that Elijah passes through on the mountain. In the beginning, Elijah encounters a great wind that shatters the rocks on the mountainside. The Hebrew Bible tells us God is not in the wind. This stage of his meditation, Elijah becomes aware of the unseen energies flowing through his body. He feels multiple currents radiating all around him. Elijah experiences a whirlwind of force in the presence of great power. But he has not met Supreme Being. Then Elijah encounters an earthquake. In this phase of meditation, the passage of energy through his spiritual centers creates a powerful reaction in his physical body. An extraordinary tension builds up inside him as the Almighty approaches and tries to forge a mental contact. Elijah's whole body shakes and trembles from the effects of the energy. God is fast approaching. The higher power has still not entered through the door. Then the earthquake is gone. There's a fire that rages inside Elijah. He now feels the presence of the one who has come. Light pours forth into his mind and fills the whole of his being. It's both blissful and blinding at the same time. Elijah feels the divine attributes that precede the divine glory. God is very close. the Holy Blessed One, has not yet arrived. The fire then passes, and a still, small voice sounds forth. Elijah has now reached the moment of true communion in this place of complete stillness. No barrier is left between him and his supernal source. Full contact is made at the core of his being, touches that which is without beginning or end. In this state of ceaseless meditation, Elijah's mind is joined to the universal mind of God. So how do we understand these spiritual experiences? How do we apply them in our lives? The Bible itself gives us some guidance in understanding these spiritual experiences. The rabbis further this knowledge with statements of explanation and clarification. But it is in the teachings of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, that we are given a solid foundation of understanding for the dynamics and process that take place as we go through the journey of spiritual awakening. The rest of my talk today will focus on the teachings of perhaps the greatest Kabbalist of the Jewish tradition, Rabbi Isaac Luria, more commonly known as the Ari, the Lion. The Ari was a dynamic and inspiring spiritual teacher who lived in the 16th century. He was at the center of a mystical movement in the northern Israeli city of Safed, and he was its driving force. For the past 500 years, his teachings have powerfully influenced Jewish communities around the world. His words are more widely known and studied than any other Jewish esoteric wisdom, except perhaps the books of the Zohar, the seminal text of Jewish mysticism. According to the traditional biography of the Ari, he spent 7 years meditating in a hut on the Nile River in Egypt before he returned to the Holy Land and began his vocation as a spiritual teacher. This intensive spiritual practice was crucial for his inner development. In fact, the Ari's whole Kabbalistic system is based on his inner experience. Teachings of the Ari are extraordinarily insightful when they are applied to the world of interconnection and spiritual awakening. They illuminate the inner dynamics that take place in our consciousness when a higher contact is made within the kingdom of heaven and beyond. The Aris created a system of metaphysical unions, yichudim in Hebrew, that provide a framework for the unfolding of our inner experiences and their accompanying shifts in consciousness. The Ari divides the work of unification into 6 stages. First, there's 3 stages of spiritual intimacy or union. These are followed by 3 stages of consolidation and growth. For the 3 stages of union, the Ari uses a metaphor, the most powerful human relationship he can think of, the sexual union between 2 human beings. In the Kabbalah, when they want to explain what higher knowledge is, Daat Elyon, they quote a verse from the book of Genesis, chapter 4, verse 1. And the man knew his wife Eve, for Adam yada et Chava ishto. In this verse, Daat, the Hebrew word for knowledge, is a euphemism for sexual intercourse. In the Kabbalah, it symbolizes direct and intimate knowing of the fullest and most profound kind. Adam became one with his wife. He knows her in a way that touches the essence of their being and merges them together. This physical union is a dim reflection of the depth of intimacy and joy that the experience of spiritual union with the divine brings. The imagery of sexual union is used in many passages throughout the book of the Zohar. However, it is the Ari who transforms this imagery into a scientific process that explains how union takes place and the inner dynamics that unfold in our consciousness. The first stage in the process of union is called kisses, nishikin in Aramaic. This is the first contact, the beginning of our soul experience. We're touched by the energy, light, and love of God. There's an exchange of breath, so to speak. In nishikin, kisses, a link is formed or awakened between the personality and the soul. The ruach, the spiritual breath from our soul, enters into our consciousness and a bond is formed in mental matter. Everything else depends on this bond and develops from it. This connection is broken, then we must start all over again. In her book, Touched by the Light, the president of Spiritual Awakenings International, Dr. Yvonne Kaysen, describes a mystical experience that one of her patients shared from her youth. The patient's own words. One autumn day when I was 12 or 13, I went for a long leaf viewing walk along a local country road. At one point, I came to an opening between the hills. Suddenly, an amazing vista of brilliant orange, scarlet, and golden leaves, garlanding the rolling hills, blazed into my full view. The sky contrasted a dazzling deep blue hue. The view was breathtaking. I gasped, and in my heart spontaneously cried out an inner prayer, "Oh, thank you, God." With this prayer, I suddenly noticed a change begin in me. The colors started to become brighter and more luminous. Overcome with beauty, tears of awe rolled down my cheeks. Then I began to feel as if I was expanding, until suddenly I felt as if I'd merged and filled the whole scene. I was one with the trees, one with the hills, one with the sky. I felt totally connected with all and with the love behind the universe. I have no idea how long I stood there, riveted to the spot, merged into the beauty of God's creation. After some time, my awareness returned to my body. Standing on the road, my face covered with tears. Though that feeling of union had gone, I still felt a strong, direct connection to loving higher power. End of quote. Not everyone has such an elaborate and powerful first kiss, so to speak, the one described above. Nonetheless, first experiences tend to be on a grand scale as they open the door to a new reality. Also, our first experience provides us with strong encouragement. It instills in us the motivation we need to go through the process of awakening our inner being more, of heading out on that path that requires the difficult work of transformation and growth, which is the only way to solidify and integrate the spiritual insights and awareness that we've gained from our experience. The second stage of spiritual union is the embrace, chibuk in Hebrew. In chibuk, we experience the embrace of God's overshadowing presence. We are immersed in the divine attributes, enveloped in love, light, and compassion. This phase takes the contact began in nishikin and kisses, one step forward towards union, where we begin to know and feel that the higher power is close. Chibuk is God's way of letting us know that he or she is there. The contact that began in kisses, nishikin, has now moved into a more expanded state of consciousness, where there's a tangible awareness of the greater reality beyond the physical realm. We find an example from the Torah of this stage of union in its description of Moses' ascent up Mount Sinai after the catastrophe of the golden calf, and after the death of thousands of people by the sword, by a plague. Moses climbs the mountain and enters the divine presence. He turns to the Eternal One and says, "Let me see your face. Let me know who you really are." The Almighty turns to Moses and responds, "You cannot see my face, but you can see my back." Moses then hides in the cleft of a rock, and God passes all of the divine glory over him. Moses falls on his face and cries out, "Adonai, Adonai, a mighty, compassionate, and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in love and truth, keeping truth to the thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. He cleanses." After this transformative experience, Moses knows that however the outer circumstances may appear, the Holy One of Israel is a God of infinite compassion and mercy. During this encounter, Moses was enveloped in divine embrace, heavenly chibuk. The divine attributes of compassion and mercy permeated into the very core of his being, and a whole new level opened up in his relationship with God. That moment, another major step was taken in the process of his union with the divine. There's some overlap between the first two stages, the kiss and the embrace, but they are quite distinct from the third stage, a union of two human beings, zivug yesod b'yesod in Aramaic. This is the true union. There's a merging of two souls, intimate and direct knowing. Writings of the great Christian mystic Saint Teresa of Avila provides us with a beautiful portrayal of this stage in the divine-human relationship. Here are her own words. Then he appeared to me in an imaginary vision, as he had done before, but in the very depth of my being. He gave me his right hand and said, "From today you are my bride. My honor is yours. Your honor is mine." The action of this grace was so powerful that I remained out of my senses, spent the day in a state of inebriation. The bridegroom and bride be no longer two, but one single will. Then, in her commentary on the biblical Song of Songs, she writes further about this state. A sort of divine intoxication, oblivious of what it wants, what it says, what it demands. He wants to fill her to overflowing, to delight her still more. He changes her into himself. And like all of those who faint away through the excess of pleasure and joy, she remains, as it were, unconscious in the divine arms and the divine breasts. She no longer cares for anything except to abandon herself to joy, nourished by the divine milk. This heavenly inebriation by which she is delighted and terrified at the same time. This holy madness. These are the three stages of union, and they're followed by three stages of consolidation and growth. They're analogous to the three stages of human development. The first of the three stages of consolidation is called pregnancy, or period of gestation, ibur in Aramaic. This phase is often spent in isolation or solitude. The Ari sets the length of ibur at 40 days, reminiscent of the 40 days of solitude in the Bible where Moses spends on Mount Sinai. This isolation is necessary because we're not yet fully established in our higher vision. We need a period of protection and nurturing for the new awareness to solidify. You'll discover such a stage or period of isolation in the life of all the great spiritual teachers, or most of them, of all of humankind. In fact, we get a graphic portrayal of this time of solitude in Arthur Osborne's description of the period that followed the sudden spiritual awakening of the 20th century Indian sage Sri Ramana Maharshi at the age of 17. Here are Osborne's words. When, after a long journey, the Maharshi arrived at his destination, the Arunachala temple, he took up his abode in the 1,000-pillared hall, a raised stone platform open on all sides, the roof supported by a forest of slender sculptured pillars. And there he sat immersed in the bliss of being. Day after day, day and night, he sat unmoving, no longer needed the world. Shadow existence had no interest to him. He sat absorbed in the real. Later, he moved to a dark and damp underground cave beneath the pillared hall, where he was discovered by a group of temple visitors. The young Swami neither moved nor spoke, seemed oblivious of their presence. They lifted him up bodily and carried him out. They set him down before the shrine of Subramanya, the side of Lord Shiva, without showing any consciousness of what was happening. For about 2 months, the Swami stayed at the shrine. He would sit motionless in divine absorption. Sometimes nourishment had to be put in his mouth as he paid no heed when it was offered for him. For some weeks, he did not even trouble to tie his loincloth. Swami's body was utterly neglected. He ignored it completely. It was unwashed, his hair grown long and matted and thick. His fingernails had grown long and curled over. When he needed to go out, he had barely the strength to rise. He would raise himself up a few inches, then sink back again, weak and dizzy. And he would have to try several times before he could rise to his fate. his feet. Speaking of this period later in life, he told his devotees, sometimes I opened my eyes and it was morning, sometimes it was evening. I did not know when the sun rose or when it set. Took the Maharshi 2.25 years after his awakening until he was fully anchored in his new state of awareness, able to return to a life of at least seemingly normal outer awareness. You can understand from the Maharshi's extraordinary experience why a period of ibu, of isolation and solitude, is needed after great spiritual awakening. Second step in the process of consolidation is breastfeeding, or yanika. Now we're spiritually born and go out into the world. However, we still need to be closely attached to our soul mother. We need to be breastfed by her, directly nourished from our spiritual root. Steady line of consciousness joins us to our soul, through which we are fed knowledge and energy. We cannot wander far from our inner contact. We continue to require a certain degree of shielding and care. We are connected, but not yet fully matured. For most seekers, it's the longest stage in their spiritual life. It's in between space that can take a variety of forms, can endure for different lengths of time. The final unfolding is called the development of the mind, or Gidul HaMochin. At this point, we have fully grown into a higher state of consciousness. We no longer need to stay in close proximity to our inner source, can find spiritual food on our own and wander where we wish. We live in the rarefied air of a new spiritual home and have ourselves become a source of energy and spiritual influence for others. Our process of union and consolidation is complete. It is at this stage that the great souls of humanity have gone out into the world to bring their teachings and wisdom to others, to provide guidance and inspiration for all those who are seeking the path to enlightenment. We find a powerful example of this transformation in the life of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic mystical movement. The Baal Shem Tov began his adult life first as an assistant in a village school, then as a teacher of children. Then he served in a house of study, and then he was a driver for his brother-in-law. And finally, he became an innkeeper in the Carpathian Mountains. He'd spend his week meditating in a cave in the hills, and on the Sabbath, he would come home to be with his wife. He continued living in this way for 12 years until one day a disciple of his brother-in-law came to eat at the inn. After the meal, he said, Israel, harness the horses. I have to continue with my journey. Baal Shem tried to get him to stay for the Sabbath, but he refused. But within half hour of leaving, his horse broke down. His wheel broke off, the horse became lame, and they had to return to spend the Sabbath at the inn. As the Sabbath day approached, he asked the Baal Shem's wife where the Baal Shem was, and he says, oh, he's out in the field with the sheep and the cows. Barely able to hide his scorn, the guest began reciting the prayers on his own. Prayed the afternoon prayer, special Shabbat evening prayers, and the special prayers to begin the Sabbath meal. Baal Shem returned, still pretending to be a peasant, said, see, you're spending the Shabbat here after all. He let the guest read the blessing over the wine, say a few words of teaching, and then they all went to sleep. That night happened to be the last day before the Baal Shem's 36th birthday. Baal Shem received a message from heaven. His time of concealment was over. In the middle of the night, the guest woke up and saw what he thought was a great fire in the hearth. He ran towards the fire and saw there was nothing there, just a magnificent heavenly light that filled the whole house. He startled backward and fainted. When he awoke, the Baal Shem was standing over him. Man should not look upon that which is beyond. The next day, the Baal Shem came back from the cave. His face was shining with the divine light, the wondrous emanation radiating from him. He recited words of blessing with great power. He shared deep words of wisdom that no one had ever heard. After the Sabbath, the disciple went out to find the people of the nearby town, and they came to greet the Baal Shem Tov and brought them to their village. We spoke words of great wisdom that opened their hearts and expanded their minds, and they all understood that a teacher like no other had come into their midst. So this is the RE's framework for all our spiritual experiences. It makes clear the many levels of connection and union that we go through during our lifetime journey. Each spiritual experience along the way, significant milestone. Wonderful divine gift worthy of celebration. Blessing to cherish and hold forever in our heart. Once the door to the inner reality opens for us, our lives will never be the same. Our mind is lifted out of the mundane reality which other people live. Existence becomes an extraordinary adventure of the spirit, voyage filled with both challenges but also triumphs beyond our wildest dreams. Teachings and stories of each of the religious traditions of the world are signposts along the route, formations of the truth of their existence left by other travelers who have passed before us on this journey of the soul. Come join me at Daat Elyon for our weekly meditations, live webinars. Go through the recorded sessions on our website. Join me for one-on-one guidance. Together, we'll try to bring the light into the darkness and illuminate this physical reality with the energy and consciousness of the higher realms.
It was absolutely magnificent. I don't, I don't know where to begin. We will have questions at the end of the next program. So for people who have got, I know that was very inspiring. You can put questions in the chat, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. David Cumes. He is a physician and author. He was born in South Africa and received his medical and surgical training in Johannesburg. Specializing in urology, he later taught at Stanford Medical Center and is currently in private practice in Santa Barbara, California. He is a trained surgeon, but he is also a Sangoma, an African shaman. He is a bridge between Western medicine and indigenous healing wisdom. The intriguing title of his talk today is Death, Final Destination, or New Address. Welcome, Dr. Cumes.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, before I share my screen, it's an interesting title because if it's a final destination, it's a possibility, but it's going to be for the very few. For most of us, it's going to be a new address and we come back and we do it all over again. So this is a talk to show us how maybe we can navigate the whole thing and improve on our control of it, because we really do not have much in the way of control. So this is the menu for today. Firstly, how can we prepare for death? Secondly, the crossing over. What are the realms that we will encounter? How do we navigate those realms? We will all face a spiritual tribunal and be accountable. And what will our options be when we do that? And the pathologies of death, which I learned a lot about in my initiation. And finally, a little bit about the guides we will meet along the way that'll help us. So this is just a picture of the divination bones. And when I initiated, I learned this technique. And what I learned is how to manage the dysfunctions of death. So in a sense, I came through the back door rather than from the front. And later on, what happened when I finished my initiation, a friend and a colleague who I was teaching for started to download a lot of information from 3 genres of spirits. They were Celtic, they were African, and they were Kabbalistic. And the whole point, I think, was of the 3 genres was to make this universal so that we didn't have a stamp on anything, because it was universals that everybody could use and they wouldn't feel uncomfortable about it. So when it comes to preparation, it's all about very simple but difficult conscious living, but especially awareness of the truth of spiritual principles. And the ancestors say, with all your strength, get knowledge. Knowledge not of the cognitive that we're talking about so much, but also of these truths. The other thing is keep it simple. And as you'll see, what really can get in the way is attachment to too much stuff. That's one of the impediments to a good crossing. And of course, being aware of the laws of karma. So before they leave or cross over, it's really important. I'm going to stress forgiveness tremendously in this whole talk, because we need to forgive those who've wronged us, and we have to ask forgiveness of those we have wronged. We have to clean the slate. We have to get rid of all the skeletons and unfinished business. We need to tell them as well that it's okay to go, because sometimes they're hanging on and they're not in a good place to hang on. They're very uncomfortable. They need to know that they can go. They want to know that they mattered. So it's really important, the death rituals, the burial, the accolades, all that stuff really means a lot to them. And in addition, we should comply with their requests, because, they might say, I want to be buried, and they get cremated. Well, that's not a good thing. They're not going to rest peacefully if that happens. So spirits visit around the time of the death and while they're dead to announce their death. This is usually to somebody who's remote and cannot hear about the fact that they died. They come for closure, unfinished business, ask and give forgiveness if it wasn't done before, because this is their last opportunity. Once they cross over the veil between worlds, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to come back. This way, they can actually download information quite easily. They come to complain, maybe about the will, or inform, for instance, maybe there's $30,000 under my mattress I forgot to tell somebody about. And finally, they can often pass on a message to another person who may be a complete stranger, because the living loved one cannot really access the information. So it's really important to acknowledge and understand and pay attention to those messages, even if they come from somebody you don't know. So when it comes to the actual crossing, the mind state is key. You have to create the reality with intention and make a positive imagery, maybe even use a mantra. Gandhi was heard saying the word of God when he passed over, rum, rum, rum. So that put him in that kind of a vibration. So it wouldn't hurt for us to practice that kind of a very brief imagery, something you can hang on to when you go through through that process. We need fearless clarity without confusion. Fear is the big problem. And we need to be completely unattached to anything, go into kind of existential free fall and let go, surrender completely. Attend to the light and the voices calling us home, because otherwise we're going to miss the boat and go to the wrong place. So the soul often lingers around the earth plane for approximately 30 days. The Tibetans say 49 days. And then eventually, this is a brief summary of the talk, they cross over the veil for transition and judgment, but there is no judgment day. It's for purification. It's a love fest, really. There's a life review and preparation for the next lifetime. And finally, excuse me if I have to nurture my voice. Finally, if perfected, they enter the causal realm, or if you're Buddhist, it will be the Pure Land, or if you're a Kabbalist, it'll be the Garden of Eden. Each to his own. You're going to go to the one that belongs to you. That's why the Dalai Lama says, don't give up your religion, because you can be a Buddhist, but maybe you won't end up there as a Buddhist. So one of the dysfunctions of death is earthbound spirits. This is involuntary. But there's also voluntary earthbound spirits that hang around the earth plane for up to a year or so to comfort and to assist and to help the living loved one. And there comes a time when they need to go away, and they will. And they also need to be given permission to go, because they're actually taking a disadvantage by delaying the soul's trajectory. And then there's the involuntary ones, and these are usually due to either traumatic death, a confused death, or sudden death. So let's briefly look at this, because it's one of the problems. It occurs with suicide, murder, war, drugs, sometimes in hospitals where somebody is obtunded from medications. And there are a lot of earthbound spirits in hospitals that play as tricksters sometimes to people that are having procedures. If there aren't any proper death rituals, it's interesting that the traditional Zulus have a death ritual where when somebody dies, they will put a buffalo thorn branch on the coffin, and then bury the person, and the branch stays on top of the grave. The buffalo thorn has a hook like this and a straight thorn. The hook is to remind the person that their body is in the ground, and the straight one is that they need to go where they belong. They will even do this if somebody dies in a foreign place. They'll go and retrieve the body. They'll put the buffalo thorn on the coffin. They'll bring it home, so that there's less chance of becoming earthbound. So I think proper death rituals, we can invent our own, are very important. Any kind of attachment is really going to be a problem. I remember having a dream once where a bunch of us were in a boat. We were crossing over this lake, kind of like the river Styx, going to the other side, going to the Vale and to cross. And there was a guy who came late to the party, and he was standing on the bank, completely naked except for flip-flops. He was hanging on to his flip-flops. And we all shouted to him to come to swim. We would pull him into the boat. And he swam, but he only swam with his arms. He was still hanging on to his flip-flops. So what happened was, before he could get to the boat and we could pull him in, there was like a whirlpool that sucked him down under. All of this being a metaphor for even the flip-flops that you hang on to, be careful of, because you need to let go and not be attached to anything. Attachments to anything at all, like I mentioned here, are really a problem. Abortion, miscarriage, there should be rituals around this if that happens. False beliefs as well, problems with earthbound spirits. They usually hang around jails, around hospitals, around cemeteries, around war fields, and sometimes around certain freeways that are dangerous. Some of them think they're actually dead, but they think they're in the right place. Sometimes they don't even know they're dead, and they're trying to converse and wondering why people are not speaking to them. Now, there are just as many paths in death as in life, according to the ancestors. There are multiple vibrations within vibrations. But there are, for practical purposes, three realms that there are. The causal, the enlightened realm, the perfected souls go there. That can be the final journey, if that's your intention, and you've done the work. There's the astral, imaginal. You'll see why it's called the imaginal. People who can do lucid dreaming will have an easy time of it. They'll navigate really easily. And Tibetan Buddhists look at the dream state as a way of practice for the astral, because we often travel into the astral in our dreams. The lower realms I'm not going to be talking about. These are the hell realms or the hungry ghost realms. So this is almost a direct quote from the ancestors. Those in the higher causal realms can make themselves known to those in the astral. Those of higher vibrations can hear and respond to lesser ones. So often we'll go to the astral and we might meet somebody like that, come along to kind of guide us along the way. However, those in the astral realms cannot vibrate to a higher level. You're kind of stuck where you are. So let's talk a little bit about that, but a little bit more about the causal beings. They can choose to reincarnate if they wish to, but they don't have to, which is kind of a boon, I guess, these days. They can travel throughout all the realms. They can be more present dead than when alive, because not only they are non-local, but they're much more skilled than astral beings, and they can navigate. They can bilocate. They have access to your karmic life book or your Akashic records. They know what your destiny is. And because of free will, they can't tell you what to do, but they can kind of nudge you and stop you from doing what you shouldn't be doing. They retain free will, and being non-local gives them a much broader viewpoint. Now, the astral realms, sadly, our karma is cut in stone, free will is lost, our future is already determined. So we've lost control at this stage. We retain the ability to help the living, but we have to ask to receive. And we're also non-local, so we can help them, and we do have some inklings as to their destiny and their purpose, but we're not as sophisticated as the causal beings. The dead depend on the living to really help them, in terms of forgiveness, and improve and bump up their brownie karmic points, because forgiveness will release you from a karmic sin, whereas it will not unless you're completely forgiven. And you have to really be forgiven sincerely. It can't be so, oh, I forgive you type of thing. Almost has to be in writing. So how do we travel? Well, we travel with imagination, and Meister Eckhart says it well. When the soul wants to experience something, She throws out an image of the experience in front of her and steps into it. So there's a story about a guy who goes to the astral realm and he has a guide to help him. And the guy says, well, you can imagine anything you want and it'll be you. You can have whatever you want, except you're not in a sentient body. You cannot feel it, but you can imagine it. No, he's an avid golfer. He decides to imagine playing his golf game, and he's in a beautiful field with the best golfers in the world. But the problem is every time he hits the ball, it's a hole in one, and everybody else is getting a hole in one. So he comes back and he talks to his guide and he says, that's pretty boring. What should I do now? So he tries a bunch of other things, and eventually he comes back and he says, this is really not so cool. Why don't I go down to the hell realms with you and see what that's like? And he says, sir, you are in hell. In a way, the astral is a kind of hell. Mary Ellen used to say it's like being locked up in Costco. You can get whatever you want, but you can't get out. So that's the astral realm. So it's not. And Bishop Tutu used to say the rules for heaven are pretty low. So we have to realize that the perfected beings are held to a much higher standard. So imagination is what happens. So we are carried by our hearts, our will, our passion, our intention, and our karma to the vibration we have earned. As Jesus said, as you sow, so you will reap. We lose touch with other vibrations. Our ruling passions endure. We stay the same. We retain our archetype. That does not change. We can create any reality, but eventually, like in the dream, it becomes boring and it dissipates and you become stuck. Now, the ancestors say the higher astral realms are quite compelling, but they're not as compelling as being in the causal. So I'm trying to get there. I'm not sure I'm going to make it. I'm trying my best. Soul and love bonds occur for the same vibration. The Darby and Joan that are tied at the hip, the one dies soon after the other one. They will meet in the astral again. Sex happens in the astral, but it happens in the imagination in the spirit world. But it can happen in the astral in the dream time. It's very interesting because when a woman has an orgasm with an encounter sexually in the astral, she feels it in her body and she'll wake up. And the man, of course, will have a wet dream. So what's really happening is kind of a paradox. You're having their experience in the astral, but it's manifesting through the silver cord connecting us to our body. It's connecting us to the body experience, which is kind of unusual. The living can assist the dead. This is really important. Rituals make them come alive. Africans say that if you talk to them and you mention them, you have an altar to them, they come alive. They may not talk back to you, but they'll really appreciate it. I highly recommend making a little altar. Don't put the skeletons in your family closet on the altar, but honor your ancestors with their death days and their birthdays and so on. It'll help you. Now, the transition period is governed by accountability, and it happens in a sort of a witnessing way. We get a rerun of our life almost in video form. There's a brilliant movie with Meryl Streep called Defending Your Life. It's worth watching because you have the defendant and the prosecutor, but it's done very friendly and lovingly. It's not Judgment Day. And forgiveness is really important because then that sort of eliminates any sinful thing, any bad karmic thing you've had if you've been forgiven before you get there. So the school for the higher self, it's a spiritual love tribunal. It's embedded in truth, and it's for improvement of the soul's path. We all are bound for spiritual perfection. We just keep coming again and again, back again and again to perfect the soul. We detach from our compulsions, addictions, obsessions, fears, and attachments. But remember, we are more enlightened there, and we can get knowledge from that realm and from previous realms as well. But when we get reborn, we forget it all. But it comes back to us as a sort of deja vu. It's like you've been to college, you've learned something, and you've forgotten about it, and then you read it, and it comes back immediately. So it's easy to remember stuff that you've never, that you've encountered before, as opposed to when you haven't encountered it at all. Forgiveness, again, I'm stressing it from that or this side, can improve dysfunction and advance the next incarnation. So souls that are together there, they can forgive each other, so it's not done, but then you have to be dead. If somebody's alive and the other one is dead, it's very difficult. You're going to have to get special help. Now, the options, I'm giving guidelines. Nobody knows the details, but these are the guidelines. I might have it a little bit wrong, But you either reconcile and return, and you usually come back into the same bloodline, which is important to know. Or you can become a guide, but I don't think we have a choice to become a guide. And most of our guides are going to be astral. If you're lucky, you might have causal guides as well. And then it's possible to graduate. I've heard this called Summerland. It's like, if you haven't quite made the grade with the spiritual tribunal, they'll push you over the top, and then you'll maybe get to be in a causal or a higher realm. You can also be forgiven and go to a higher vibration by being forgiven. You can also connect brownie karmic points by being a guide. You can complete work that you didn't do in your lifetime and also improve your karmic profile. So guides and ancestors. Now, I say that, collectively, because a lot of our guides, even our so-called foreign guides, were our ancestors in previous lives. They look foreign, but they love us, and that's how they become our guides. They may be very exotic, Tibetan, Egyptian, anything like that. We've all come through many, many lifetimes and probably sexes as well, many cultures, many religions, and many personas. Your ancestor will retain their persona, they retain the language, they usually retain their dress, but sometimes they'll be more resplendent, sometimes they'll be more simple. They can look younger or older, but they're also non-local, so they have a huge advantage over us in being able to see a much broader perspective. Your guides can save your life, so if they give you a message not to take a plane, listen to them, it can save your life. They've gained new knowledge and have released from prior dysfunctions. But when they come back, they forget. So they've got to start all over again. But some of that knowledge is easily remembered as a form of deja vu. They're not always right, so you don't have to listen to them. The causal beings you should really listen to because they are right, even if you don't agree that they're right. They're right for your destiny and your higher purpose, which often is not, you don't really realize that they're trying to tell you the right thing. Now, the lower astral spirits can be dysfunctional. This is really important. The kind of spirits that you pick up maybe in a seance or maybe where you've had a shamanic encounter and a lot of spirits come from the other side. And they may look to you as their resolution and their solution, and you cannot trust them and you have to be very circumspect about them. They may put you in touch with a business situation, wanting you to go into it through a dream or something, where it's not to your advantage, it's to their progeny's advantage. They can do the same thing with a love relationship. So be careful of guides. Don't accept all of them. If it doesn't fit with your heart, don't accept the message. Now, we've talked about earthbound spirits being intrusive, but the other intrusive spirits I want to talk about are your loved ones or your skeletons in the family closet, which are the really important things. This is the work I do a lot. I would say 80% of the work that I do in my year is reconciling the dead and the living together. The earthbound spirits we've talked about, but remember that whether it's an old lady haunting your house and walking down the hallway, it seems very innocent, it's going to have an energetic effect on you. There's nothing good about being haunted. So these spirits cause dis-ease, maladies. They can cause headache. They can cause somatic complaints, anxiety, depression, bad luck, trouble in your work, trouble in relationships. They often will affect your weakest system. Like if you tend to get headaches, you'll get migraines, that kind of thing. So there's nothing good about being haunted, and this is kind of the work that I do a lot. So I want to talk about shades. Interesting, shades is a word my Zulu mentor used, and it's actually a Hebrew word, and which means a ghost. And these are the shades, and I want to talk about your blood root ancestors or grands. They have remorse, guilt, shame, the skeletons in the closet, and they are now stuck up there without forgiveness, having to come back and do all of that stuff again, which is kind of a terrible thought. So the dead often haunt the living, hoping they can get attention, and the living may hopefully go and see somebody, a shaman or a sangoma, and be diagnosed as what's the problem, and then they can be released with a forgiveness ritual. Now, if you look at the commandments, 1 of 10 says, honor your father and mother and your grandfathers and grandmothers. It doesn't say like them. It doesn't say love them. We need to honor them with forgiveness because they gave us live birth, and we would not be on the planet if it wasn't for them. So no matter how bad the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse, the onus is on the child to forgive the ancestor. The advantage of it is if we release them, we get rid of them. That's one very good reason to release them. The second thing is that forgiveness is healthful. They've shown, neuroscience has shown that people with AIDS who forgave the person who gave them the virus live longer and have far less side effects than those who did not. So we have this albatross around our neck, this grudge, and when we let go of it, we actually are doing more service to ourselves than we are to the person we're forgiving. So that's another reason. The other thing is the sins of the fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers are visited upon the children unto the fourth generation. That's the Bible. But it could also be the Native Americans who say the seventh generation. That doesn't mean that if your father robbed a bank, you are going to be responsible for it. But what it does mean is that these spirits often reincarnate back into the bloodline. So it's much better that the person with an alcoholic syndrome who's forgiven will come back next time, maybe as your niece or nephew or grandson, maybe even as your daughter, who knows, and they will be more purified. They'll be in a better situation to overcome any alcoholic addiction. So forgiveness is useful. So, we don't have to forgive the so-called other intrusive spirits, which we can pick up in different places. You might pick them up by being at the wrong place at the wrong time because you're in an altered state of consciousness, or you've got soul sickness or soul loss, like sex, drugs, rock and roll, self-abuse, abuse by others, severe, exhaustion, fatigue, and illness can all cause, shattering of your aura where the spirits can affect you and they when attached to you. But those are not so much the ones we're talking about. You do not have to forgive those. There's no commandment about that, but it's helpful to forgive them. Okay, finally, just to end off, know before you go. None of us would go to outer Mongolia on some exotic trip without doing a lot of research. We'd go to the internet, we'd get a guide, we'd make preparations, but yet so few of us get prepared for death. I'm not talking to this audience. I know that everybody is very tuned into this, but I don't know who else is is listening to this. It should not be uncharted. We can know a lot, and these are basically the guidelines that can help. Remember that until you cross over, you have some control. Once you're in the astral, you have no control. In the causal, you have some control. So you can hope for it to be your final journey, strive for the Garden of Eden or the Pure Land or the causal realm, whatever you want to call it. Or, we're going to all come back again and again. Hopefully, according to the Buddhists, they pray and they meditate to inherit another lifetime where they can carry on their prayers and their spiritual practice at a higher level. So I think I'm probably a few minutes in hand, but I'll stop there. And, I know the whole thing is steeped about death, so I hope I haven't said any platitudes that everybody knows. And I'll stop sharing, and then I'll leave it to the panel.
Okay. Well, there's so much. I'm just been writing and writing and writing and going back and forth. So
Yeah, okay.
that was fascinating, fascinating. Let's see. Somebody did ask right this minute. Yes. Do you have an email address that you can share?
Yeah,
So that's a
dcumes@gmail.com. And if you like, there are a lot of talks on my website. The website is davidcumes.com. And, you can just download videos. There's one on death that's a little more detailed if this was a bit too much for you. It's more like a couple of hours talk, and other spiritual subjects.
okay. Wonderful. All right. Let's see. I'm just going to start going off some of the notes that I've taken, and we'll go back and forth a little bit. Rabbi Glick, let me start with you. And my question, the first one I have was, you talked about all of these wonderful wonderful experiences of so many, but I'm wondering, do you have mystical experiences?
Yes. I actually did a talk last September for Spiritual Awakenings International, talking about my something of my spiritual journey and the experience I've had. And really, I think that more than anything, and this is what I try to give across in the talk, that any real spiritual teaching has to come out of one's own inner experience. Otherwise, it has no authenticity. That's what gives it authenticity and authority. And that's why I spoke about how each of these great teachers went spiritual awakening, spent 7 years in meditation, 12 years in the mountains, whatever it might be, in order to break through the lower self, reach into the higher levels of existence, and work to transform themselves and develop a connection with the divine. And that's an ongoing process. And I myself have had all kinds of experiences. And in a way, I can say my talk reflects something of my own experience.
You were drawn to those stories to explain some of your own experiences, I'm sure.
In a way, they talk to things that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
wonderful.
What I think that's at the heart of spiritual wisdom. And that in a sense, people go through experiences and then they want to find a way to explain them to people, to give them over. So they tell stories, they give examples, they create teachings. I mean, the Ari's whole system was based on his 7 years of meditating on this little island in the Nile River. And after those 7 years, he had extraordinary visions and expansion of his consciousness and new ideas. And I think that's, I spent many years living in a small village in the south of France, living a contemplative life with my wife. And that's part of the place. But spent time with India. I had a Swami who's my teacher, who was an enlightened being. And she also opened many doors for me. I had a charismatic rabbi that also opened up my first awakening to something greater. And of course, these things always happening in conjunction with life events happened at the same time that my mother passed away. And then a few days later, came to visit me. So all these things were part. And if you want to take a look, people should watch my video about my journey, and you'll hear more. And maybe some of that journey will resonate with what I've spoken about today.
Wonderful. Yes, well, we will later go ahead and put that on the, I will put it on the Facebook group, a connection to that so people can find it because it is in the SAI library. Dr. Cumes, I just have a question about you didn't talk at all about being a Western doctor, and I'm just wondering how that has worked out for you to have these two different viewpoints and worldviews, how you've brought them together and how they've reflected in working with the people that you work with.
Yes, I think what's helped me a lot is the fact that I do my job and I do it well. So my colleagues, they think I'm weird, but they respect me and I get a lot of clout. And I often get the question about living in two worlds. And the reality is 80% of my practice is pretty, it's pretty empirical and conventional. But I have an unusual office. My business manager, Adrian, is just a wonderful spirit. And when people come to the front and they feel better just talking to her. So there's a different atmosphere as opposed to all the other doctors' offices you go, they're under the gun. They have a hard time. The officers are not happy. And it begins right when they come in the door. I would say about 10% of my work, they come and see me as a physician. And then because they're open to the idea of having a divination and spiritual treatment, they then come and see me in my yurt at home, and we do bones, and then we dispense rituals according to what's happening. Because sometimes, and it's often different things. It might be breast cancer, it might be pancreatic cancer. It's not necessarily from the urological system. And then what I can do is, God's law is free will. So you've got to ask to receive, and you've got to ask very specifically, and you've also got to be very precise about what you want. So the more you know before you go to the divination, the better the question will be. So I have access to the computer. I can look at the x-rays. I can look at their blood work. And then we formulate the question, like, how does it look for you to have surgery as opposed to radiation therapy? Everybody's different. The ancestors will know. They're not localized in space and time. They'll say, really, you should have radiation therapy, that sort of thing. So it works really well together. The interesting thing is they do not want me to give up my practice, and they even want me to continue with my surgery, which is kind of interesting. So I think it gives me some clout and I get a lot of people from different places who wouldn't normally come to an African Sangoma, even if they're more powerful than I am, but they come to me because of who I am.
Right, right. It's wonderful, this opening up of all of these places of wisdom.
Mm.
Let's see, Rabbi, people want to know, I think they're interested in your center and also what books and resources you recommend to learn more about your work.
Well, my center is in Jerusalem, and the in-person center's work is active sporadically at the moment, because during this past year or so since the war, I've been doing a lot of traveling, and I'm in Oxford now for a couple of months, and I've also been several months in our home again in France to have contemplative work. But the online community is ongoing, and every week we have 2 live meditations online, and every first and third week I have another meditation people can just drop in on. We have once a week webinars people can sign up and join to. I offer people one-on-one spiritual guidance in their spiritual life. I've been working with people on the path for 40 years. And we have a book club where we've been reading, for instance, the great Hasidic master Rabbi Nachman of Breslov wrote stories, incredible stories that are like dream inspirations with profound meaning. And so we've been looking at that on a monthly basis. And we have community events that we share together. And we'll be doing a retreat a year from now in upstate New York. And I'm hoping to do one sometime during the fall in Jerusalem or in the Galil in the north of Israel. And the books I would suggest, first of all, if you really want to understand my work, begin with the 3 books that I wrote, because to just tell you a little of my trajectory, I began in a conservative home. Not the conservative is the middle path in Judaism, the middle branch. And I went to a day school, so I got a solid training in Jewish texts. I then went to an Orthodox rabbinic seminary and became a rabbi. And so after I had these years of training, and then I became involved with a Hasidic rabbi that took me into deep mystical teaching and Kabbalistic teaching. And after I'd gone through all this, I suddenly met this Swami that came to Israel to teach yoga, and found herself speaking to Orthodox Jews and kibbutzniks all about a yogic perception and understanding of mystical teaching in Judaism, of the Kabbalah. And that's why I began my meditation, and I had powerful Kundalini awakening with her, and many other kinds of experiences and inspiration. And what I ended up doing is going back, learning a lot about other religions, Buddhism, Sikhism, Hinduism, obviously, all the branches, Buddhism, Christianity, Sufism. And then I spent some time going to visit, being connected to different monastic orders and the different traditions. And after all that, I went back after 15 years in that direction to the Jewish sources and saw the places that resonated with that same sense of living wisdom. And I pulled them out of the sources and started to collect them together and create the teachings and the whole system of understanding that are in my books and in the courses that I have on my website. I have a path lined out for serious seekers that's based on personal transformation, study of spiritual wisdom, and meditation and contemplative prayer. And those are books, and there's references in each of those books. You can read the books of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan about Jewish meditation. You can read the books of Swami Shivananda and Swami Chidananda of the Divine Life Society to hear about what's happening in yoga in a very accessible way. You can read the books of theosophy to find out some of the bridges between the two directions, and come to more of the Spiritual Awakening International events, because they open a lot of these different doors and connect them to people's inner experience.
Yes, which it seems to me, it's like you have created your spiritual life is like a huge tapestry that you've just woven all of the threads of all of these spiritual traditions all into one beautiful tapestry. It's
Thank
wonderful.
you. That's how I
Dr.
feel.
Cumes, I think that's it. Let's see. Bethany's got a question, and I thought this was sort of fun. Talking about guides, are they formerly human? Are they different species? Are they sometimes from different planets? Do you have a sense of the variety of guides that we have?
Yeah, in African tradition, they're terrestrial, so you can have tree spirits, plant spirits, animal spirits, power animals that come and visit you that are alive. They're terrestrial, they're cosmic, and they are water spirits. The water spirit is key in the initiation of the shaman, the sangoma. I was told, just a reference to the other question for the rabbi, they was told that unless you go to the water and meet the water spirit, you will never initiate. And they were right, because I had this oneness experience that the rabbi talked about, that a lot of people talk about, that never happened to me in quite the same way before. But, they say no shaking, no shaman. Usually in the Zulu and the African tradition, you shake. And that was definitely somebody who was coming close to me, that my ancestors didn't want them getting into my body and possessing me, but they were around me, and they changed the whole trajectory of my initiation. But they can be your pets, your horse, your dog, your cat can be your spirit guide. And they can be ancestors from long ago that loved you from long ago, your mother, your brother, your sister, your lover, your teacher, from past lives. And those are the ones that are usually going to be. They can also be dark spirits, trickster spirits. There are, if you think of kind of the words like goblins and elves and fairies, these are real. These are what people are able to see, and they give them different names. And always they're going to be dark ones, they're going to be light ones. There cannot be any dark without light, and vice versa. So, but for the most part, it's going to be your own bloodroot spirits. I notice a question, well, what happened if you're the last in line? You're never the last in line. You have hundreds of previous incarnations and other guides, and you'll have other guides from other times, and you maybe have the good fortune of not having to come back into your bloodline. It's not always the best thing to do. So I hope that answers the question, but it's kind of complicated, but it's really not. Your ancestors are often, the Africans always talk about ancestors, but they can be foreign. Particularly the woman who's a black woman who throws the bones for me, I don't throw them. It's telekinesis. The bones get thrown by an energy field. I'm just the messenger. I read the message. She is an African who was appointed to help me. I didn't know her so she's a true, what they call Mandawi spirit, a true foreign guide. So depending on who's having control up there, whether it's God or maybe causal beings, I don't know. There may be somebody appointed to you, but they're usually going to be human. But don't discount your pets, Don't discount the power animals that are often manipulated by your ancestors to help you, because an animal can appear to you, the power animal usually will be behaving unusually. A hummingbird will be going around your head or looking at you in the eyes. It's not normal, you know. They have been manipulated by your ancestors to give you a message of support. Don't
Nice.
ignore support from them in terms of the dark side. You know, if you see a rattlesnake on a hike, be careful. If you see a coyote on a hike, be careful. If you see a king snake or a garden snake, it means an endorsement from your often on the path, waiting for you to step over it. It's all messages from the beyond that are there to help and support us. We all get them. Some people know about it. Other people think, well, this is interesting. But endorse it, because the more that you support, the more you have an altar, the more you ask to receive, the more you show gratitude, the more they will show up in your life. Even have a party for them and welcome them to your table, put out a plate of food for them. And but you know, you want to get rid of the skeletons in the closet, and the best way to get rid of that, even if they're not haunting you, is with forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Absolutely. I was going to go back to that. That
Yeah,
forgiveness is the key to so much release.
yeah.
Let go of those grievances.
Mhm.
Well, that wraps up this amazing session that we've had. I feel like I've been in the metaphysical soup, and there's just a whole lot to unpack from these two wonderful presentations.